So, hello, Guinevere, and welcome to the show. Thank you so much for agreeing to come and chat with me today about your life, your experiences, and your newly published memoir, When the World Didn't End. Would you like to start by introducing yourself to the listeners?
Hello, Casey. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Guinevere Turner. I am a screenwriter. I'm an actor. I am a director. I am all around what sounds like, when I say all those things out loud, a Hollywood gal, but I'm not. I'm actually talking from Brooklyn, New York, where I live with my partner and my beloved dog Marbles. And I wrote this book about my experience growing up in the Lyman family, which was a cult that I was born into, and couldn't find a way to write about for 50 years. But here I am at 55 and I wrote it.
It's fascinating to hear you word it that way because your book is made up of diary entries that you wrote growing up within the group and experiences that kind of followed your time with the Lyman family. So in a way, you've always been writing about this group, but putting it into a memoir in the way that you have is fantastic, having this kind of source material and wording it this way. So you've had all these different creative ventures and these masterpieces that you've been an integral part of, and now you've found the space or the time or the motivation to finish this memoir.
I feel like the sort of uh heart of that statement was a question, which is like, why now? Right? Like why did you choose to write this book after all these years? And it's so I in 2019 I made a film with my longtime collaborator Mary Herron. We made American Psycho, we made Notorious Bettie Page, we made, well, this one. It's called Charlie Says. And Charlie Says is about the women who killed for Charles Manson, and really focused around their time in prison, which is like, I don't know, everyone's like, the orgies, the drugs, the trial, the blah blah blah. But then like we lost public interest in, like, what, I mean, those women didn't die. They went to prison. And the story of them in prison is incredibly fascinating. And I love that movie. I'm so proud of that movie. But I was saying to Mary, I was like, I'm so sorry, but like, everybody's gonna want to talk to me about my own cult experience when we're doing publicity for this movie. And I know from experience that when you talk about growing up in a cult, people are just like, wait, what? And just like, ready for all the deets. And I spent a lot of my, adult publicity career just pivoting away from this story, because like was not relevant to any movie that I was in the business of promoting. And so, but I said, Mary, I'm sorry, this is going to happen. And like, now it is relevant. And I do need to talk about the fact that I wanted to write this movie because I felt that I had something to bring to it that not, maybe no screenwriter does. And she was like, well, you should write a piece about your experience and get ahead of the conversation. And I was like, oh my God, I wish you'd said that to me 5 months ago. But so I wrote a piece, and amazingly, it got into the New Yorker. And that was like, the interest, the level of like response to it was so overwhelmingly great. Both acknowledging me as a writer, but like, from like cult survivors all over, just like came for me, like just in all these brilliant ways. And I was like, and then all of a sudden people wanted me to write a book, and I was like, fuck, I guess it's time. I guess it's time after all these years. And what was so interesting is that when I wrote that essay in the New Yorker, it's like May 2019, amazingly, they published it 3 days before the movie came out. So every journalist was like, I read your piece in the New Yorker. How did your childhood inform this movie? Instead of being like, what about your childhood? It was amazing. Mary's a genius. I just all of a sudden was like, okay, it's time. But when I was writing the New Yorker essay, I was more afraid. Like nothing I've ever written has made me fearful. Writing is my joy. Writing is my life. Writing is an extension of myself. But when I was writing this piece, I was like, there was like a permanent knot in my stomach. And I was like, what chip did they put in us that we will never speak of this? And I'm like, I've been out of that family since I was 11 years old. And yet I'm terrified at 50, whatever I was, 51 or something, to talk about it. And I'm like, fuck that, power through. But like literally, no one that I grew up with, and my generation is like, 60 something people, has ever written about it or spoken about it publicly. And I had never really thought about that. And I was like, okay, so I'm the first one. And I'm like, okay, actually, like, let's think about this. Like, you actually are the voice of a very specific, very small generation, but still, like, this is powerful. Like, you have access to people paying attention to what you write. Like, it's fucking time, girl. But I was just like, so like once I did that, then I was like, a book, sure. That was the hard part. And believe me, people came for me, like people that I grew up with, and my aunt, who is, my mom's sister, who's still in the family, like called me crying, just like, please don't do this. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry.
Done.
Should I just be like, I'm sorry, New Yorker, I can't because my aunt is crying? I'm like, bye. It's like, no, I'm doing this. So anyway, that was a really long ass answer, but that's a whole thing about how this book started and about like my own kind of like the thing I needed to jump over to write the story was the one of the more intense things I've ever experienced creatively.
It's interested to hear you use the word intense, and in my questions on the question list I wrote to use the term cult in a different context. You wrote the cult classic American Psycho. Looking back on some of the things that you've written, is it clear to you that some of the kind of psychological parts of of certain kind of psychological thrillers, psychological horrors, is inspired by any events of your childhood, or is it just the Hollywood gal inside you that gives you the ability to write such amazing pieces?
I think it's funny because when I was like, I got this amazing, beautiful lit agent, and he basically taught me how to write a book proposal, which is, I don't know if anyone who's listening understands, but like, it's a lot. And he was not fucking around. He was like, you need to write 2 chapters. And I did that. And that was also like one of those steps where I was like, okay, I can do anything, because I deliberately chose 2 really, really difficult points from my childhood. And I was like, yep, I can write that. I mean, thank you, Tito's vodka, but whatever. Because I would write it, and then I would write it drunk, and then I would like, go back sober and be like, okay, girl, get it together. But like, I just needed that like push. And so when I was in this journey of like, talking to editors and publishers with this 40-page book proposal, there's this one woman who's like a grand dame of publishing. Her name's Kate Medina. Red power suit, pearls. Huh. It's funny actually, because I'm ironically wearing pearls, but is it ironic? I don't know if it's ironic anymore. I just kind of like them. And it's like $8 on Amazon. Do you know what I mean? Not my grandma's pearls. She said, so you wrote American Psycho, and you wrote, this movie Charlie Says, and she's like, what's the through line? Like, what, like, how are these things connected? And I was like, very I don't know, like out of my depth in terms of the publishing world. So, you know, like feeling like I just spent all these decades understanding how Hollywood works, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like so comfortable in all of those rooms. But all of a sudden I'm like, I'm weirdly a writer, but like I'm also talking to people who like they're selling themselves to me. That is so unfamiliar to me. I'm always selling myself to other people. And so, you know, and they know they open with like, this, you know, these pages are amazing, like your story's amazing, we want, I'm like, oh. But anyway, she said, you know, what's the through line with your work? And I said, toxic masculinity. And she said, toxic masculinity, what a great turn of phrase, I'm going to use that. And I was like, I don't know how to gracefully tell her, like, I did not make up this concept. This turn of phrase, but like clearly American Psycho came out in 2000. Like this was not, you know, a common phrase, like, you know, culturally, you know, present in the way that it is now and has been for years, thank God. So anyway, toxic masculinity is the answer to your question with a very, very elaborate setup.
There's definitely some parts in the book When the World Didn't End where I found myself kind of reading and taking like shorter breaths and being like, oh no, what's going to happen, and it gave me that sort of feeling that you do get when you're watching like a psychological horror or thriller where you're like, oh no, something bad's going to happen. And I have a specific example of that I want to dive into in a little while. But when I began reading your memoir, and with the title When the World Didn't End, my preconception was that it was going to be about like a Christian doomsday cult or something along those lines. Because most of my experience up to this point, when there are doomsday prophecies, is usually something to do with a major religion of some type, or a, you know, a sect inside a major religion. So I was surprised when I began reading the book to realize that it was about something very different, specifically about a group I've never heard of. And I wondered if you could give the listeners a sort of rundown of the group that you were a part of growing up and some historical context and where you specifically place into that timeline.
I grew up in this cult called the Lyman Family. And like every cult, at least back then, they did not call themselves a cult. To this day, I don't think they would call themselves, I know they would not call themselves a cult. They are still alive and well, old, but whatever. And so it's important to note that when I tell you the story of this family, it comes from the space of being born into it. And so I didn't, like, it's not like the doctrine was handed to me. It's just like how I grew up. But the leader of this cult, Mel Lyman, he started the family in like 66, I think. I was born in 68. He was very anti-hippie identity. He wrote a book. He wrote two books. One, The Mirror at the End of the Road, and the second, Autobiography of a World Savior. So you can get a vibe from that. If you read the book, you'll see by the time I was old enough to think critically, I guess, which was like 8, he was sequestered, and the wisdom was that he just decided that he wanted to live a nightlife, sleep during the day and be awake at night, which I, later learned was because he had cancer and he didn't want anyone to see. And then he died, and the family continued most of them thinking that he was alive. Their beliefs, it's so interesting to think about. And obviously I thought a lot about this when writing this book. I'm shaking my head right now for listeners. because it's so hard to articulate. Souls, about souls, like, if, like, is your soul good, is your soul in the right place, are you in the right place, like lots of astrology. So, you know, I'm a Gemini, but like, don't let me give you that Scorpio rising, because that's how I was scolded as a child. um just a lot about being present. But then, like, you know, like any adult could look at you and say, like, you know, your eyes look dead. And like, what are you gonna do with that? Like, make your eyes alive. I don't know. Like, we were raised with this like very amorphous kind of like, you're never doing it right. There's a lot of reincarnation talk. And then eventually, which hence the title of my book, that, you know, the world was gonna end. Like, the world was gonna blow up, I guess. Fire, I don't know. And we were going to be all taken to Venus by UFOs, and that's where we were going to live. As I say in my book, I was like, as a teenager, I was like, oh, college educated woman who worked on Wall Street, what the fuck? Like, I don't know. I mean, we didn't have Google at the time, but like, we pretty much know that Venus is not an inhabitable place by mammals or humans. I guess that's the same thing. And she just said, it's complicated. And I was like, I'm listening. I'm like, I'm listening now that I'm a teenager, and now that I'm really able to look at what the fuck we came through. I'm dying to know what the fuck.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a very thought terminating cliche where somebody just says it's complicated and expects you to just go, oh, okay.
Yeah, which I wasn't at all at the time. I was just like, okay, like, you're not ready to talk about it, nor will you ever be. Or maybe like the house of cards that you've built for yourself post cult is something that I shouldn't poke out right now, because you're just, you know, trying to survive and, you know, fucking live with your choices. So I didn't poke her. But anyway, that's where I come from.
There were some parts of, I mean, apart from the anti-hippie aspect, there were some parts of the writing that reminded me of Helen Zuman's writing in Mating in Captivity about her time on Zendik Farm, how there was a male role model figure head who was then, once he passed, almost replaced by a matriarchal figure who changed some things, and their homestead was on a big farm, and there were aspects of that story that felt familiar with the information that you provided in your memoir. But it was slightly different with the Lyman family because it wasn't just in one location. There were several different places where members of this particular group existed.
Yeah, so we grew up, they had at the time 5 compounds. They still have them, except they have one more now in Mexico. Martha's Vineyard, Boston, New York, LA, San Francisco, Kansas. And Kansas is where I spent a lot of my time. That was a big farm. And LA and Martha's Vineyard. So they have like a lot of land. And I grew up, you know, traveling among these places. Kind of, there was a thing. So Jessie was, you know, the leader, really, because Mel Lyman was dead, but not dead, but whatever. And she, once a year, she would travel from Los Angeles, that compound there, to ultimately to the vineyard, which is like where she grew up. Ish, like summer home. And if you were lucky, very lucky, you got to travel with her in a caravan of like 5 vehicles, and going across the land, and like stopping in Kansas where that farm was, and all of that. And it's in my book that I was just a lowly kid until the caravan came by, and her daughter, she has two daughters, but her daughter Daria just, decided that I was, she just wanted me, basically just wanted me to be her handmaiden. And I was swooped up into this caravan and became a part of the elite, which I think is also like something that makes my story unique, because I got to see both sides, and I got to experience how the girls, it's all about girls. I grew up with a lot of boys too, but it's all about the girls. The girls who were lowly like me before called me out, basically, and were like, "Oh, you're fancy now." And I'm like, "Don't say that," but it was true. But I wasn't really fancy because I was actually a servant.
One of the really touching parts of the memoir include moments of kind of carefree, innocent childhood, which is kind of jarring in some places, because there'll be really lovely carefree moments of, like, kids running through the farm, having experiences, doing things that children do, mixed in with things in like, oh, the end of the world is coming, oh, you're reincarnated, oh, you're an old soul, you must have been here before. And it's kind of jarring to have that juxtaposition of having indoctrination mixed in with these really innocent experiences. Could you give us some description of the community that you grew up in, and some key moments from your childhood that stick out in terms of those more innocent experiences?
I mean, I deliberately wrote it this way because I really wanted to wrote the book When the World Didn't End This Way, because I wanted to subvert several things that are happening in the cultiverse. As I think it was you, actually, maybe it was you, it was Esther Friedman. Anyway, this cultiverse term is very useful to me because I am in it in all these really interesting ways. Just, for starters, being a survivor of one. I wanted to, I was responding to this question. So when you talk about growing up in a cult, I learned early on, people are just like fascinated, and they ask inappropriate questions, and they just are like, oh God, was it this? Was it that? And they want like the dirtiest, scrappiest, most painful details, which is like rude. First of all, this is rude. I'm like, how was your childhood is what I usually say. Because everyone has a fucked up childhood. It's fucked up to be a child. And so what I wanted to telegraph in this story is like actually so much beauty, like so much, like my relationship to being a kid surrounded by kids. And yes, we had chores. Yes, we were working in fields. We were doing like so much manual labor, but it was fun. Like, it's fun to be around a bunch of kids when you're a kid, like nonstop, day and night, like we're singing, we're laughing, we're running, we're doing like this was our lives. And yeah, dark shit around every corner, but like in actual fact, like something that I hold dear to myself and miss is like growing up that way, like growing up with like intense community. And even though the adults were mostly incredibly punishing and scary, unlike most people, I grew up with like 8 hours a day of just being like feral children running around on a farm. You know what I mean? And that was like, that is like who I am in my heart. I'm always looking for community. I'm always looking for that, like that feeling of like, oh yeah, let's just like fuck around and just do whatever, in my book, I wrote this one experience of this kid getting his fingers chopped off. And it's funny because, I've been doing book events and stuff, and I was trying to find a part of it that is kind of palatable in this context, and I always introduce it by saying, I know it's weird that a kid getting his fingers chopped off is the most heartwarming story that I can tell, but it really is, because, you know, I love this kid, and like, you know, I had to pick up his fingers off the chopping block, etc. And like, you know, it sort of underlines like, oh, what happens when you give a bunch of 7, 8, and 9-year-olds an axe and ask them to chop wood? Like, well, how's that going to go, do you think? Someone's fingers are going to get chopped off, and they did. But the way that I tell that story, to me, like, just sort of exemplifies like beauty and horror all in the same, and how we took it all kind of in stride as kids, because that was our life, you know. And that's like what I constantly think about when I think about when people ask me, like, well, before I wrote a book, you know, what was your childhood like? I'm like, I'm pretty sure that I can ask you, Casey, or anyone, can you name a fucking horrific thing that happened to you when you were a kid? And we all have the answer. You know, something fucked up happened to us, of course, because that's what it means to be alive.
There are several moments in the early parts of When the World Did End that talk about animals. And it's very clear to me now from our conversation before we hit record that the animals are a big passion of yours, and invoke some very strong emotional responses from you when we talk about animals that we love, animals that we've had. And growing up on this farm, you were surrounded by all of this manual labor that involved having to work with animals. And even though listeners who might hear us talking about certain things happening on farms that aren't specifically cult related, like having these chickens that are growing up, and you're growing up, and the chickens are growing up alongside you, and then all of a sudden the chickens are going to be served for dinner, and it's part of your job to help that happen. There'll be people that are maybe listening that grew up on farms themselves, or in situations where they had to experience that as well. But those are some of the more difficult parts of the book to read from your child's perspective, because it's clear of the impact that it had on you as a child. So do you think your love of animals came from that time? Or, I mean, this is a hypothetical question, so it might be impossible to answer. Would you still have the same love for animals that you do now had you not been around them so much as a child?
I'm making a face right now that is just me thinking that I have something very clever to say right now, which is, it's kind of chicken egg, isn't it? It's funny that you ask that, because you will not be the first person to ask that. And I'm like, I'm sort of like deeply amused by how that's like a takeaway that people get from the book, because obviously I am like an animal lover. Like, I can't even fucking kill a mosquito. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm just an animal lover. I'm a creature lover. I respect life. I know that's like a cringy thing to say, but I really do. Like, I really don't think that I deserve to kill anything, or that anyone does. Chicken egg though, chicken egg. No, I don't think that my love of animals comes from that space, because when I look back on it, like before the animals that I knew and loved were killed, I was already so deeply attached to them. And this is like the first time I'm saying this out loud, but what I'm thinking about is that I feel like they were the only thing more helpless than me. And there was something about my little kid nature that was like, I can help. Like, this is not hopeless. And then, you know, they slaughtered them and I had to pull their guts out, but whatever. I'm fine.
There's these kind of beautiful moments where you would collect scales from the fish, and it's like keeping those parts of those experiences with you, which I thought was such again, another kind of really young thing to do, and such a beautiful thing to do as well. And it goes back to those kind of jarring moments where you would have these experiences down at the Oh,
That's all the scales and all
oh,
the things.
they're a lot bigger than I thought they'd be. I was trying to picture them in my mind, and they are kind of like the size of my thumbnail.
Yeah. Anyway, I just, for those of you who are listening, I'm showing Casey this diary that I have with a billion fish scales in it.
It's gorgeous.
The name, who caught them, how what pounds they were, blah blah blah. Like it's I'm an archivist if nothing else.
It's another one of those moments that you capture so well through your kind of child's eye of having these beautiful experiences down at the creek and running around with all of these children, and then all of a sudden there's these chickens and these fish that are being used for feeding people on the farm, and then you have another beautiful childhood experience, and then all of a sudden someone's getting hit with a paddle. So it's very much allowing us some insight into what it was like as a child on both sides and how they coexisted as well at the same time, which must be very kind of almost give you whiplash as a child, I imagine, kind of being like, oh, 1 minute I'm in this frame of mind and now this is happening. And it's all decorated in a way that keeps you in the book, keeps you reading, and makes you kind of really feel like you could almost be there. So seeing that page in that book is actually quite wild for me after reading your memoir and then seeing those pictures. How did your life in the community change after Dario took you under her wing? I don't know which way you would want to word it. Everything started to change for you at that point, really.
um it was like it was like in my tiny universe, this is like, getting the ultimate promotion. I was also, for the first time, and this was very rare in the family I grew up in, I was elevated above my mother. I was like cooler, sexier, like more interesting, more important, etc. And because I was raised like Jessie, who was the woman who pretty much ran it, she said to me, like, I don't know if I put this in the book actually. She's like, you are your mother's mother. Like whatever is happening right now with the two of you, like you were put on this earth to teach her something.
Wow.
I'm gonna go with that's actually true. Which is
Yeah.
like it's a really fucked up thing to realize that like some weird ass culture that was fed to you when you were a kid is actually true. My mother is she's a complicated figure, and she's not uh she doesn't have agency in the same way that I do. And we're only just reading the book. She's only just reading the book right now, and we're only just talking about it. And that's super intense. For those of you who don't know, like my mother left the cult with an abusive man who's abusive to her and abusive to me and my sister. And like half of the book is about that. And reconciling that for her is something that's in process because she hasn't read the book. I mean, she's reading the book and texting me about it every day. And I'm like, I actually, like the other day, it was like 9 a.m. and I was like riddled with anxiety. And I was like, why am I so anxious? Why am I so anxious? I was like, I need to get a bottle of rosé. And I'm like, no, we don't actually need to be drinking at 9 a.m. because we're anxious. Like, that's just like textbook, no. But I was like, but why am I so anxious? I didn't get the bottle of rosé, by the way. Um, uh, and I'm like, oh, it's because my mom is writing to me in real time about her response to the book. But she's like, in the beginning of the book, so she's like, oh my God, Phaedra. And here's what Phaedra said to me, the spirit of the Ouija board spirit that we talked to in the book. And she's like, oh, Obre, blah, blah, blah. And I finally, I was like, and I texted her, I was like, Mom, you're going to get to a really fucking hard part to read for you because it's in which you are a terrible, terrible mother and do not protect me. And it's all very upsetting. And she's like, yeah, I know. And so then I wrote her, like when I had this rosé inclined anxiety attack, I was like, I just need to tell her, like, please write everything down
Yep.
separately and tell me at the end what you think, because I like the stress of how you're going to respond to this. Like I don't know what it's like to have been a terrible person, but she's about to, and I need her to just like, you know, just like do that on your own time. Don't make me go through this motherfucking story again. Because also, I think that one of the like complicated and challenging things about writing a story like this is that like I think people read it and assume that you're totally comfortable talking about like the worst things that happened to you. And I'm like, no, nope. Also, I'm not better. Like, this was not a cathartic experience. This was a re-traumatizing experience. But I did it because, and actually, after not talking to my mom for 3 years, I finally called her because I was like, I'm done being mad, and I'm done having people ask me, "Are you dead?"
Yeah. And now when people say, how was your childhood? Read my book.
Yeah. Um, I just, I was just talking to her, and I realized that I don't like it, like, just because I wrote this doesn't mean I'm better or like even in any way over it. Like I'm not like a super healthy, I mean, I'm good, but I'm not like like whatever, that was that and that was this and this is that. I'm in process, and
Yeah.
writing about it has opened up so many, like, just talking to other people and stuff. But I'm not like, yeah, let's like totally go to chapter 34 where I'm like forced to give a fucking blowjob for like 2 years of my life. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not okay. I just said
Yeah.
that. Like that, it's like it's a challenge to share your experience of trauma and then engage with how people respond to it.
Yeah. I imagine as well that I think it's important to highlight that in a process of recovery, there isn't really an end point. So I think a big misconception that comes through from people like myself coming from a non-cultic experience and wanting or trying to understand somebody that's had a cultic experience, being like, oh, but you're better now, oh, you've written a book, so you must be okay now. But the process of healing never actually ends. It's continuous. Things crop up. You might not have thought about an experience for years and years, and all of a sudden something, a smell, a sound, a song, a person reminds you of something that happened, and that can kind of have an effect on you for another few weeks, months, or years, where there's another hurdle to look at, to deconstruct, to think about, why does it affect me this way? What can I do to move past it? And then it will happen again and again. So that's another really important thing to point out for listeners such as myself, coming from an outside perspective, that it is a continuous journey. And when there are conversations with individuals who are willing to share parts of their experiences and be open and vulnerable and honest, to allow some of us to have that education, that it's a very sensitive and precious thing, and to just be very mindful in those conversations, because we don't know how a person will feel when they're telling a story, or if they kind of desensitize whilst they're saying it and then afterwards go away feeling very kind of um sad, down, exhausted. I always like to check in with people after I have interviews and just say, was that, are you feeling okay? Was that okay? And to always check in with me if you're not, in a few days' time, so that we can think about where we go from there in terms of taking care of people's well-being, because that's so important when people have these conversations.
But
Just to
Casey,
kind of go off on a tangent.
I'm a tough guy. I really am. And, there's a reason that I didn't write this book until I was 50 something, because I just, wasn't ready in all these ways. And anyway, I very much appreciate what you're saying, because it must, like, you must interview tons of people who are just like talking about it for the first time or the second time or the third time. I feel like one of the most interesting things that has evolved since I wrote this book, which, by the way, I don't know, I just really didn't like the title, even though I made it up. I had like a billion other titles, and my editors were like, editor was like, no, no, no. And I'm like, can I call it Guinevere? For listeners, I, as a kid, because I was an incredible weirdo, not because I'm actually a homosexual, which is also true, but like, I like was called Guinevere when I first came out of the cult and went into public life. And it's hilarious to me now because, like, did they see that I was gay before I did? But anyway, so When the World Didn't End to me was like one on a big list. So they were like, that's the one. And I was like, oh, I don't know. It seems a little pandering. I'm very interested in like how cults are represented in you know, public, you know, cultural, in the cultural moment, right? And it's not good. It's not really good, actually. And I have never, aside from my own movie, Charlie Says, I've never seen anything on TV or in a film that speaks to my experience. Like, never. I mean, so there's a movie called Martha, Marcy, May, Marlene, Martha, Marlene, blah, blah, which is actually really good. I really, really like that. But it's like a woman out of a cult, you know, like I've never seen my experience represented.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot focused on in documentaries with cult survivors where people talk about maybe the beginning and the middle, but there's not much on the end, as in once a person leaves and the struggles of recovery and the processes that people go through. And I think that's a big thing that's missing from the educational space in the cultiverse. You know, the kind of different pathways that people might go down in terms of understanding their experiences, putting words to tactics that they were subjected to. The Sarah Lawrence documentary Stolen Youth did a very good job at capturing that, more so than a lot of things I've seen on TV. But there's still a big gap missing in that part. I would say of.
So first of all, I went to Sarah Lawrence.
I have that on my notes. I just thought that was so strange, like a few years before, but it's still, I think it's
I mean,
yeah.
I'm kind of dying for them to ask me to do an event because, like, basically Sarah Lawrence College is the hero of my movie. I mean, of my book. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like I'm like, I have to go. Like, Sarah Lawrence. I can't not go there. Like, you know, and experience that, whatever that is. But there's that thing about that documentary that is, you know, part of a larger question. So I mean, I am a cult survivor, but also just a cult scholar. And I've been like paying attention to cults. I was watching the David Koresh thing happen in real time. And I was like, stop. Like, oh my God, do you understand what an apocalyptic cult, like, do you understand that you're doing the thing that is gonna make everybody die? Like, stop. I was like in tears every day. I was like, oh no, they just need like one little schmo like me to be like, okay, here's how this shit works. And don't do this unless you want everyone to die, which maybe they did. Sorry, I get really emotional when I talk about that because it was the first time I was like, okay, yeah, I grew up in a cult and I understand how they work, and you're doing it wrong and people are going to die and I don't have any power to do anything about it. That was hard. Sorry, you actually asked me a question.
I didn't know if you were going to say something about the Stolen Youth documentary.
Right, yeah. So the thing about that was that you know, like in this like proliferation of cult documentaries, I'm sure I see like, you know, like it's not about the people. It's not about us. It's about you know, like, you know, people sitting on their couches being like, ooh, cult documentary. You know what I mean? Like, ooh, it's true crime. And like, you know, our society's obsession with true crime is its own subject, but like the fact that cult stories are under that umbrella is also of note. Um, because I actually was watching something that you did with this, I forget the guy's name, but like he was making the argument slash posing the idea that like not all cults are criminal. And this is very interesting to me. So like, you know, the cult I grew up with was fucking criminal. Like they, you know, were having sex with, you know, 12-year-old girls, etc. They also like, you know, tried to rob a bank and some of them went to jail, blah, blah, blah. But like a cult is not a crime. A cult is, and I think this is the most important thing, when you're calling a group of people something that they would never call themselves, you should be careful. Because like, of course, the people I grew up with would never call themselves a cult. And like, and what we've seen it, you know, in like the current kind of, you know, cult climate is that like, you know, people like Keith Raniere just get ahead of themselves and say like, you know what, people are going to call us a cult, we're not a cult. But the major fact is that like cults don't call themselves cults, and so like maybe we shouldn't call them cults. We should call them whatever the fuck we want to call them, especially if they traumatized us. But do you know what I mean? Like it's super intense. So when I was watching the SLC documentary, my alma mater, like I like hilariously texted with a lot of friends because like the Slonim Woods 9 was like already a punchline because we were like, what do those people even do? Like it was always just like so far. It was like the most remote location at Sarah Lawrence. And then the documentarian, he made a big, you know, play to say that like he's not going to, like he made this documentary like devaluing, decentering Larry Ray and, you know, really talking to the victim survivors. But I'm sorry. You showed me videos of this man slapping himself so his sister would stop crying. You showed me videos of like Larry Ray like pulling this kid's tongue out. Like you like I don't know that like your whole like idea of like, you know, centering the survivors is fully realized, because they also get like we need to look at that stuff. We need to understand like this is fucking madness, this is abuse, this is like violence, this is insanity. And so like in that way it was incredibly compelling to watch this documentary, but like over and over he showed that footage and I was like, I don't know if it's just baby culty me just being like I don't think this is okay, or if it's just like me who hates horror movies even though I'm like famous for writing one is is okay. I was just like, I don't, this doesn't feel okay. This doesn't feel okay. And it feels like you're repeating it for like the wrong reasons.
Yeah. Well, somebody, Elgin Strait, who is a former second generation member of the Unification Church, who has his own podcast called Falling Out. He once told me that it's trauma porn. He used the term trauma porn for when spectators want to hear the worst parts of people's stories, and that stayed with me after that. I was thinking, oh my goodness, absolutely, that is the term that we should move away from. You know, we should be trying to do the opposite of that, which
And yeah, did I write a book? That's trauma porn. Do you know what I mean? Because I actually like, there's a website called Goodreads, and it's like every schmo who ever read your book I say schmo, thank you to all the beautiful reviews, people. And so like you can go deep. I as a filmmaker, I don't really pay attention to reviews. I don't care. But like there's something very like granular and true about like these reviewers on Goodreads. And so I just, I'm not a masochist. I'm a arguably big top, but I read all of the 1-star reviews, and what they all said, like the thread, if I can just go like sort of macro with it, is that they wanted more cult stuff, and they found the stuff that happens after the cult, which is, for listeners, I just go through some like horrific sexual abuse and violence and eventually get away, and here I am. They found it, like this one woman wrote, I just felt like a creep when I was reading it. I'm like, okay, that's on you. If you feel like a creep when you're reading about sexual abuse, and like, I'm so sorry, like that is not like actually what we did in my film Bettie Page, which is like, you get it. This is a menace. This is fucked up. It's behind closed doors. I'm like, no, I was like, you know what? We need to actually talk about that. We need to like fucking like make people live through it to understand like this is not just like this systemic fucking thing that almost every woman I know well enough to talk has experienced on some level. Like I need to write this. And like the fact that people are like, that was too much. I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. Was my childhood too much for you?
In our book club, I say our book club, it sounds quite culty. In the book club that I attend each month, we choose a different book by kind of what's everybody got on their agenda, and I mentioned that I had this this interview with you coming up, and that's what I was reading at the time. We were all thinking about books to kind of talk about, so we chose When the World Didn't End for last month's book club. And what I heard during our conversation from 3 other cult survivors who had also read the book was that the second half of the book was incredibly important to each of those for different reasons. And Erica Borman, a fellow memoirist who's written the most incredible book, Mission of Malice, My Exodus from Quasi-Ubuntu, she talked about how when she left Quasi-Ubuntu and fell into a series of damaging relationships and abusive situations, that so much of your story resonated with her. And again, it goes back to so much of the discussions that aren't taking place about the aftermath of exiting a cult or leaving a cult or being forced to leave a cult, because some people don't leave by choice and then rebuild or build a life afterwards. So those 1-star reviews don't mean anything when you have cult survivors coming to you saying like this impacted me in such a profound way. So we can happily ignore all of those.
I mean, I make a lot. Apparently, I make a lot of jokes because I realize I just like introduced several concepts with that, because laugh to keep from crying. That I can't technically be called a cult survivor because I begged to stay. So I mean, obviously I am, but like there's something funny about that to me, that like, imagining a life in which I was allowed to stay, and like how long and how weird and how fucking difficult it would have been to get out when I was a teenager. Like so many of my friends, the women that I grew up with, whose stories are fucking intense. So much violence, so much violence, so much more violence. I think what happened to this family is that they had to actually tell everyone that like Mel Lyman is dead, which might have been a shock because like it was years. I mean, it was 4 years of my life knowing that this man was dead. And then just becoming teenagers and being like, we're not we can't all marry each other, you know, like we're siblings, we have grown up together, like we are like, we love each other in a way that is not romantic or sexual, you know.
One of the moments that had me really uncomfortable and really gripped, and it probably sounds so strange for me to pick out this one moment in when the, you know, the whole book in its entirety exists, but I don't know if it's because of a personal experience I had when I was younger. But there's this moment you have on the farm where you find this baby mouse, and it's so stressful because you want more than anything to be able to help this poor tiny little thing and
Right, so
help it survive somehow. Um, which happened to me when I was younger. I found this baby mouse, its eyes were closed, it had like fleas all over it, and it was the teeniest, tiniest little thing. And I had a pipette and I was trying to like give it milk and stuff, and it didn't work. But this part in the book is like something out of a horror film, because you have this tiny little thing that you're trying to transport somewhere to safety or find something to help it, and you go through a door and there's adults there and they're like, what do you have? And then you get past them and then there's another group of adults, and it's kind of like when somebody's showering and you know that there's something ominous around, and you're like, oh no, the shower curtain's going to come back, and then it doesn't, and then they're like brushing their teeth in the bathroom mirror, and then they close the mirror with one finger, and you're like, there's going to be someone standing behind them, and there isn't. And it gives me goosebumps thinking about it, because you had this moment where you were getting past one thing and the horror didn't happen, and then there was another moment where you're like, is it going to happen now? And it didn't. And then eventually the adults get involved and everything goes wrong. And this is where your kind of brilliance merges in your writing of horror films and your writing of your memoir. It was just like such a small thing, but it felt huge when I was reading the book. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but I just wanted to let you know that that's how I experienced that part of your book.
Ratso Maru, a humble soul, wearing smatches and touches of rigmarole, with a tail and a tail and a tale to tell, in disguised ears and eyes, and a something and a bell, hippo hawk, polylock, nimbery bimbery poo, was a piece from Mel Lyman's book Mirror at the End of the Road that I loved, because I don't know, it was actually like knowable, I guess, unlike so much of his memoir. Was like, I just had no idea what he was talking about as a kid, but this one I was like, he's not even, he isn't actually talking about an animal in this moment, but I was so like, I just loved it. I love lyrical things, you know. And so I named this mouse that. And I actually cried a lot writing that particular part of the story, because it's also the story of how like Daria and I became friends, and how I got chosen to be elsewhere, elevated. Um, I was, I guess I look at it now, Casey, and I'm like, you know, I was just trying to save things that, you know, because I couldn't be saved, you know. Um, I can't lie, like, you know, when I think about Ratso, I'm still sad. I'm still sad because like he was such a bonding, I don't even know if Ratso was a girl or a boy, but like he was such a bonding moment for me and Daria, and like his death the next day, spoiler alert, listeners, um was so devastating. I don't know. I mean, it's, you know, it's a, I was searching, I think, for like something grounding, and like this little mouse was very grounding to me, and her love for this mouse was very grounding to me, and I was like, okay, this is why I think Daria, you know, she might hate me to this day. She just wrote me something very weird in a text, but it's just one of those moments of life where I was like, my love for another thing can actually bring me more connection, which is like weird because like, what? You know, I'm growing up in a cult and, you know, challenged in so many ways, but in ways that I did not understand because I was a kid. But like when I think about Ratso, it still makes me cry.
It's I mean, it's a beautiful part of the book, but very stressful and very sad as well. And there were so many moments that I could have picked out, but that one for me was one that I definitely wanted to ask you about. And the specific kind of teachings and doctrines of the Lyman family reminded me a lot of the Fellowship of Friends, with the New Age aspects, reincarnation, doomsday, talking about space and star signs. And it's kind of picking out a lot of different things from New Age influences and kind of mashing a lot of stuff together with the
Right, which is
specifics.
because like people ask me all the time, like, what did he believe in? You know, the leader, and I'm like, A, he was dead, and B, like you have to, and this is why I wrote the book the way I did, which is, you know, entirely from the perspective of a child, is like, we didn't know. I mean, you're just fucking born into this shit. And like, I'm like, I don't know anything else. I feel like this is a hard thing for people to wrap their heads around. Like, imagine that you're just born into a community that is like insular and what's that word I'm looking for? I'm a writer. I swear to God, I can find this word. Help me, Casey.
Cloistered.
Sealed, I guess, sealed, but like there's a better
Yeah.
word. And so it's just something that I like thought about a lot when I was writing the book, which was like, I need people to understand that like when you are born into something and raised in it, it's just everything. Like, we're not trained as children to like suddenly be like, but what about the outside world? No, no. I mean, that's just until you do, like that's not a thing that ever happens. Like you could, you know, Jesus Christ, they could have taught me French.
It comes through incredibly in your writing that's exactly the experiences that you had and the environment that you grew up in and the thoughts you had. And in the book club meeting, I talked about the most profound part of the book for me, where I was reading it and I was like, oh my goodness, this is such a huge revelation, was the idea of cognitive dissonance through the language that you knew and understood. So you've mentioned already that you're a Gemini, and a Gemini is like, you know, the sign of the twins. And at one point in your mind, as a kind of on the cusp of being a teenager, there's this moment where you're having thoughts and feelings of one thing and thoughts and feelings of another that just don't work together, and you're wondering if it's your fault or if it's the group's fault, and you're like, maybe it's my Gemini sign, maybe my two sides are fighting against one another, and that is cognitive dissonance. But who knows that term when they're in a cult? Who knew that term kind of pre 5 years ago? So it was the most incredible thing to read. Your kind of young mind was understanding that there was these conflicting thoughts, and the terminology that you had to apply to it was the cult terminology of using it's my Gemini sign. And it was just so incredible to read. And I actually had to stop reading at one point because I was like, wow, what's happening in this child's mind?
I wrote, and it's actually from my diaries at the time. I wrote, I have two Gemini sides and they con each other. And I am just a big con. I'm 10 years old. I mean, what the fuck, man? I
incredible
mean,
though. It shows your kind of your underlying critical thinking and doubts coming through without really understanding that there is anything outside of that environment. I don't know. It's just to me, it was just incredible to read that, especially coming straight from you as a child.
and like this is a piece of madness with writing this book. So obviously I have these diaries. You can see scratched out 1979, but like scratched out 04, because the when the world didn't end, it was turned to zero. I was like, at first with my editor, I was like, I have all these diaries. What do I do with them? Like, are they a part of the story or not? Or do I just use them? And she was like, I don't know. And then like once I started really digging in, I was like, holy shit, like no, they're essential. They are essential in for so many reasons. And number one is that like I knew going in that the people I grew up with were gonna call me to question about my veracity, my like how the fuck could you even know this and remember this shit? And I'm like, y'all bitches gave me a journal when I was a kid. I'm sorry. You gave it, to all of us, but like I really took to that. I really took to that and I really fucking wrote shit down and like it's very I was like, thanks for co-writing the book, baby. That was
Yeah.
really amazing. Because I'm just like, okay, you can't like when you write a story like this, especially because I wrote it from such a young perspective, obviously people are gonna call you out, blah blah blah, and I'm like, this is literally what I wrote when I was a kid, so you can't really be super mad at me or even fucking deny what I'm saying, because like that's me as a kid. I wrote because of this, I'm reaching for my book right now, which I'm not like a creep who always has my book right available, but my girlfriend is mad at me because I hadn't signed one for her. But I wrote, my author note is the following, and this is all about those diaries. When something we love is taken from us, we love it more. So it was for me when I was cut off from one world and forced into another that felt strange and dangerous. My way of coping with this loss was to preserve with a passion every detail of where I came from, to recite over and over to myself a list of the people I missed, to tell myself the stories of the world I left behind with a ferocious will to savor and protect my memories. I did this through writing and through reading and rereading the diaries I'd already written, desperate to keep it all alive, sure that I would go back to it someday, and hell-bent on being worthy of that return.
Wow. Oh, it's
I
like being at an intimate book reading. Thank you for that.
But do you know what I mean? Like I needed to say that. Like, don't come for me. Like you gave me a fucking diary and it turns out I'm a writer.
Yeah. And the really unique part of this book was the volume of diary entries included that you were where you weren't recalling memories or reframing them or anything like that. You were taking what you'd written at that time from as you said, an archived resource that you had. What was it like for you as a writer, as a kind of a cult survivor, as somebody putting this book together, to go back through all of those writings that you made as a child to 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 kind of work out what you were going to use? Because some of it's really heartbreaking stuff.
um, I mean, as my author note suggests and points to, that this one object, which is like me being in the family and then out, is something that I read and reread and obsessed over. Like I could probably literally tell you the entire fucking book, and it's as you might imagine 365 pages long. I so revisiting it, even though like it was like it is such a like a tome, you know, it has so much power for me. um uh it was already very familiar is actually my point. But it was also like hilarious to me because like in my mind I'm like, you know, I grew up in a cult with like no doctors, nah, literally go to the dentist at some point in this book. I'm like, okay, whatever. You remember things how you remember them. So it was like, you know, as I've said, I was like, fuck. I was like, fuck, that was a really fucking rough childhood, girl. But I was also like, I'm so fucking tough. I'm so fucking tough. And like, maybe that's not like the most beautiful thing about me, but it is 100% who I am. I am tough as fuck. And when people are like, I was listening to a podcast, I listen to them a lot now, of this woman who was like, wow, you know, I had a really difficult childhood. My parents were divorced when I was 6. I'm like, you what now? Oh, I'm sorry. Were your parents divorced when you were 6? I try not to be mean, but I'm also like, okay, girl, did you recover? It's not the
That's
trauma Olympics. It's not the trauma Olympics, but honestly, sometimes I'm like,
read my book. The second half of the book is very different from the first half, but it's almost like two cults, because I would describe the second one as almost being like a family cult environment that you moved into, in terms of the controlling measures that you were under, and the information control, the abuses that you sustained in this second environment. And it's when you leave Daria and you leave the convoy and you leave the group to go and live with your mum and her partner and your sibling. And the circumstances in your mum leaving the group, were they similar to yours? Was it her decision to leave the group, or was it decision made for her?
I mean, it's a funny and interesting question because I actually, I'm moving to the smoking space, um, because I literally just asked her like 3 days ago, like, Mom, I don't know, like, what the fuck happened to you, like, what? And you know, she's a can't figure. Anyway, her uh answer was, you know, predictably unsatisfying. But I was kicked out. Like I wanted, I didn't just want to be there. Like, imagine like it's your whole life and they're like, go away. I was like devastated. I was like confused. I begged. I said, please, please, please. And I, you know, now I laugh because I'm like, I'm not a survivor, actually, etc. Um, I don't know. It's a big question. I mean, because it's very like arguably the best thing that ever happened to me is the worst thing that ever happened to me, which is that I was kicked out of a cult and I was like I don't know how to like even express the devastation and fear that I was feeling at 11 years old, of like, now this is like, you know, the world full of like soulless people, and like they are contagious, is one way I was raised. Like, you know, like you can like look someone in the eye, and if they don't have a soul, like that's actually something that could happen to you. And I was like just really fucking scared. I was really fucking scared.
When you relocate to your mum's house, there's you continue journaling. That's always been a big part of your life. It doesn't stop once you move to a new location, but you do get to experience education, and that was another part of the book that was kind of like I when I was, you know, rooting for young Guinevere, I was like, yes. And I just wondered if you could talk through the listeners who well, for the listeners who may have experienced homeschooling and then moved into education, or who had different types of education growing up, what it meant for you having that experience as somebody that came from a sealed system into this new place.
It's a really like joyful question, actually, because like when I think about that transition, I think about the one thing that was so amazing. I was like, actual education. How did I know that actual education was a thing? I don't know. Um, I was like, I mean, I was terrified of like going to public school. I'd never been to a fucking school in my life. But I was also just like, wait, they're gonna give us books. There's gonna be like, I'm this kid in terms of like, you know, yeah, I want to learn more. Like I'm like a fucking nerd. I just really love information, and I love to like frame my life around like what stories I want to tell, and that begins with information. Um, I was beside myself. I was like, okay, like this is really fucked up. Like my mom, who doesn't care about me, just left with this fucked up man who I didn't realize how fucked up he was. But I'm like, what? I'm in school? I'm so happy. I was so fucking happy. And it kind of blinded all of my like cult sadness and family sadness, because I was just like, oh, I get to learn shit. So like the way that I was raised education wise, it's hard to talk about for me, because um when I look back, I'm like, what if I'm actually a fucking like genius? Because it was very it went like, so they built a schoolhouse on the property that's in LA. And that was actually fun and sexy. I don't know. I was like, new building, yay. But then like it would just be like random people that I grew up with, adults being like just like talking, and it would be about their lives, or it would be about like, you know, the astrological presidents, you know, like FDR and Abraham Lincoln are Aquariuses. Uh, and that's who I grew up, and I just was always like, but what, but wait, but and they were just like really in love with, they were in love with JFK, they were in love with like FDR. And so like I feel like my whole education before I was, you know, went into like the real world was like about Aquarius presidents.
I mean, if there was a major in that, you would have
I
been
mean, I
laughing
don't
at the time.
know. Like, yeah, I mean, yeah, that was educational, but like I definitely was like, but what about, but what about, but what about? And I was like, nobody cared. And like, you know, most of the girls I grew up with were groomed to just be the wives of like some older men. And I didn't want that. But I kind of thought I wanted it. But I didn't know what that would even be like. And I was like, I like had this like low level fear all the time of like, that's going to be a thing that's going to happen to me. But in the meantime, I'm like, Abraham Lincoln was a what now? What was his rising?
It's a very empowering part of the book when you have sort of like it's like a safe haven that's offered, almost the school experience, but with all of the other factors involved, it's a place where you're extremely vulnerable. You're exposed to all of these new experiences and all of these new people, and you have this horrific family environment that you don't want to go home to. And through your journals, it's clear that there is so much, you're so angry, and your teenage self is just furious quite a lot of the time, and rightly so. And I don't know how you navigate that. As a young person, emotional regulation is difficult anyway. We're learning so much. Hormones are all over the place. With all of the other experiences that you have on top of that, how was it for you in terms of existing and surviving? Do you recall having moments where you were like, okay, here's my exit strategy, here's how I take care of myself? Or was it more of a, I have to get through every day, let's just take everything a day at a time, because I can't do anything more than that right now?
Oh, it's a juicy question. I All right, first of all, I want every single person who's listening to read a book called
When the world
what my
didn't end.
yeah, well, that one, yeah, obviously, but What My Bones Know. Do you know this book?
I don't, but I have a feeling, is it similar to The Body Keeps the Score?
It's a cousin.
Okay.
What My Bones Know, and this is really actually an answer to your question. What My Bones Know, this book written by Stephanie Fu, who is like, in my mind, like a bigger genius than me. She's a journalist, but she's also a survivor of like, you know, really fucked up shit. And the way that she writes this book, oh, it just like, honestly, I like cried in a way that like I cry when I think that someone has written something beautiful. It's her journey through, you know, figuring her shit out. And one of the things that she says, I did not know this was an actual thing, CPTSD, which is I didn't know. I don't know however many years I am old that I didn't know this was a concept. And so what she says is, I mean, from the many fucking brilliant things that she says, is that if you have CPTSD, which is like, you know, there are people who have one traumatic event and they like, maybe it's in front of I think this is actually her example, like maybe it's in front of a Dunkin' Donuts, and then they like go back to the Dunkin' Donuts and like, no, Dunkin' Donuts, you will not traumatize me. But if you're a person who grew up with the madness that I grew up with, and so many people grew up with, you like everything, I'm sorry, so many things are triggering, but you don't know. So you might suddenly be angry or anxious or like, you know, hostile or overwhelmed. And it's because there are triggers all around you that you can't possibly fucking identify because it's your whole fucking life. And this has made me a better person, especially for my partner, my darling Isabel. Because I'm like, I'm really weird right now. I'm like really like fucking pissed about nothing. And then I'm like, okay, no, that's just like, that's what it is. Like, you're not crazy. You're actually just a person who's just like trying to fix themselves every day. You know what I mean?
Was this a book that you were reading during your time living in that home that helped you to navigate the experiences that you were having?
Oh no. And I'm so excited that you just asked me that question, because the most healing fucking space that I have found is the Knowledge Center. I literally will cry when I talk about this. The first time I went to a knowledge meeting. Okay, so the first one I went to was like for like just people in cults, and I was like, oh, you fucking assholes. Like, you're just like these absolute fucking fools who fucking joined cults. Got over myself. Also, just, they're on their own path. But then I got into this group that is for those of us who are raised in. It's called the Raised In Cult Support Group from the Wellness Center. I have never laughed and cried and felt more seen in my goddamn life. I was just like so nervous. I'm just like, I'm scared of therapy, whatever. Because people telling you shit. I grew up that way. Just like elevating, like just beautiful, like seriously. For anyone who's listening, I will say I have worked through a lot of different groups and like ways of healing from being in a cult, and I will say, bar none, the Knowledge Center is our place. It is our place. It is beautiful.
Just a massive shout out to Yanya for just being like the GOAT, the greatest of all time.
I mean, I fucking love Yanya. She's the most. And like, we were having a Zoom recently and she was like, I'm old, Yanya's like, I guess 80. And she's like, but I want to leave a legacy. And I'm like, yes, queen. Yes. Because like, it has like changed my life. It has been like, I find, because I'm doing like all these like pods and whatever, I just like, I find people who like need it, and like I've gotten them in, and like it's a little culty, I guess. But I'm just like really fucking in love with this fucking safe space that is about cults. And I have never been in a space where I feel so fucking seen.
And those places do exist, and it's a very important moment to highlight that for anybody listening that is in need of that support. The Lalich Center offers so many different various types of support on sliding scales as well. So there are there's financial availability for people with all different types of incomes. And there's a lot of work that goes around fundraising for the Lalich Center to support individuals who might not be necessarily financially equipped at all to seek that professional support and help. And as we know, there is so much need for cult specific trauma support, not just therapists who have kind of generic therapy available,
who need you to write an entire book so they understand you.
Yes, yeah, exactly, yeah. No, I don't think many of us have it in us. Do you have a book in you? Maybe, but we shouldn't have to sit down and write a whole book to and even then, I mean, therapists are probably so overwhelmed when individuals sit down with them and say, this is my experience. And then you, okay. So I don't know where to start here.
I would like to like actually say that like, so I like I really try with therapy and only because my partner is just like, it's a lot. And I have not found this yet. I have not, but I feel, I mean, I'm not gonna lie. I actually weirdly am just like, fuck my career. I want to become a cult therapist because like there is a space, like it's hard for me to see a space that has need that I could fill. And one of them is fucking cult therapist.
The last part I really wanted to talk about before we finish today is towards the end of the book, there's this figure who really scared me when he was first mentioned, and this is Lloyd. And Lloyd, I was so skeptical of Lloyd. I was so worried that Lloyd was gonna come. Like, I have goosebumps thinking about it, and it does make me quite emotional thinking about it. But you're in this situation, you're being emotionally, physically, sexually abused in this home, without the support of a parent or a caregiver, and you end up forming a bond
I
with
know.
you form a bond with a friend who you share your experiences with, and his father Lloyd rescues you. He basically like shows up in this like white chariot and he says, you're going to come with me, and you go with him. And I was so worried. I was like, this is the most vulnerable person in the most vulnerable place, and this man's just swooping in and taking her out of this environment, and who knows what's going to happen. And he saved the day. He just came in and changed everything for you. And we don't have enough of those people in these stories.
I know. I miss him so much. My editor wrote to me when I was writing this. She said, like, he puts his hand on your shoulder and like I'm nervous.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, he's actually a good man. He's actually a really great man. He was a great man. Yeah. I know I
just
natural storytelling madness, you know, of course I need it to be like confusing and like, you know, that was like the moment, but like that actually was the moment. Like that man saved me. That man fucking saved me. And out of nowhere, like out of
yeah.
like he didn't fucking know me. He was just that guy. He was just like this amazing guy. It was just like, that sounds fucked up, whatever. And I'm like, I like literally have a fairy godmother story. It's so outrageous and amazing because like this guy was just like, yeah, totally. No.
Yeah. Yeah. It's incredible because it's I mean, through it just like there's not enough of these figures in these stories, and sometimes they come through, and I always like to just give a little kind of shout out to the people that come through and make these things happen, because the book escalates and it gets stressful, and the chapters are short, which I really appreciate as a reader, because I'm not a fast reader, and if I'm one of these moods where I'll just get to the end of the chapter, it's easier for me to keep reading a book if the chapters aren't really long. You know, we all love Lord of the Rings, but sometimes you just can't do it. So when I got to this part of the book and he took you in and he supported you, it felt like that was your like almost do or die moment. Things were escalating so much to the point where I wondered how, I mean, I know you're here because I was reading your book after the fact, but I was thinking, how are you going to get out of this situation? And he came at that moment that just felt like, you know, who knows what would have happened if he didn't show up at that time. Yes, I just wanted to make a point to say thank you so much to Lloyd. What a hero.
Oh, thank you so much, Casey, for acknowledging that, because like honestly, it's not like I'm you know, just immune to that situation. That is like the most incredible moment of my life, actually. He was like, man, out of nowhere, it was just like, I'm gonna fucking take care of you and make you safe. And I was like, okay, I'm not sure what's happening to me right now, but a random man is about to save me.
Yeah, and not hurt you, you know. That was my biggest worry, and it didn't happen, thankfully, because at that part of the book I was like, please just let it stop, because I didn't know how much more younger Guinevere could take. It was just horrible. So you get to this point where Lloyd rescues you, and you write American Psycho, which, by the way, I was so excited when I got an email from your team asking if I wanted to speak with you, because American Psycho is a film that I absolutely love. And yeah, and you're still making amazing things. You're still writing amazing things. You have such an incredible career. Now you're the author of a memoir. I mean, where do you go? Where do you go from here? Are you working on things? Are you taking a break? Are you focusing on like a promotional tour for your book? What's next for Guinevere Turner?
All right. I you know, to write a book about a cult is to really, get into the excuse me, the space of like how many people are so interested in cults. And that's been like, an interesting journey for me, because I'm like, it's not entirely not bullshit. I think that like in 2020, Wild whatever came out, and like everybody was like very, obsessed with that. And a friend of mine who's also a cult survivor said like it's like being obsessed with human trafficking. Oh my god, I'm obsessed. What? I'm sorry. Like being in a cult is not entirely gorgeous and amazing. So I'm like, what I would like to do is just sort of really write a piece that is about like why cult fascination and why now.
Yeah.
And you are, part of the problem / part of the solution, because you are there and you are thinking about it, but like, what the fuck? It's
Yeah.
like literally like I'm not like like how are cults just just a thing that people don't actually respect. I'm just like, whoa, I'm thinking about it. It's really hard. Um, what I've gone with, what I'm thinking about, and please tell me if you have any thoughts, is like we're just marginalized, right?
Yeah.
We're just we're fascinations. I mean, and you're arguably like, the worst person to talk about this about, but I'm just kidding. But do you know what I mean? Like, why do we love cults? Why do we think cults are true crime? Why do we think that like a real fucking experience is something of like hilarious note? It's too
Yeah.
much.
Yeah. There's definitely a need to bridge that gap between cult survivors and the bigger world. And with there's a need to change underrepresentation of cult survivors, and just education and rhetoric in general. There are so many things that come out, newspaper articles, salacious documentaries, and things that just focus on the you know, as you said, the
I mean, have you
glorious
seen
part.
this like thing that's called like how to become a cult leader?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I said in a review the other day, like one of the opening lines is that cults almost always end in bloodshed and death, and I was like, well, actually, most of them don't. So we should be saying to people that they almost always end in bloodshed and death, because then that's adding to the misconceptions that cults are, as Alexandra Stain would say, exotic and they don't exist all around us, when actually they do. So that, you know, it's difficult because we we need more educational stuff out there to teach people about cults and how to equip themselves against cults, and how to understand that not everybody joins a cult. Individuals are born and raised in them as well, but with documentary pieces that come out and just add to those misconceptions, it's hard. But then Yanya's in it, and Rachel Bernstein's in it, and Teddy Hose, and they make really positive contributions. So, any lasting comments or thoughts that you'd like to pass on to the listeners before we finish today? And I ask you all the places where people can find a copy of Where the World Didn't End.
Well, thank you for asking. I think that the way that I have experienced writing this book is the following. It's really fucking hard to write a book with yourself, about yourself. I encourage you to do it. I encourage you to do it. It's incredibly challenging.
And it's available wherever you get your books, I believe. I think it's in Waterstones if you want to buy a book locally in the UK. And I will post links in the episode description for copies of that book, and I truly recommend people go and read it. There are so many unique aspects in this memoir. I've interviewed so many different memoirists on this podcast now, and the really special parts of this book are some of the things I've mentioned, and so many more that you just have to read the book to find out about. But the journal entries are so special. So I really do encourage people who are looking to understand their experiences more, looking to learn more about the experiences of people growing up in cults. What better way than to read journal entries from a child's mind at the time that they're writing it? It's incredible, and I really appreciated the opportunity to read the book. And I loved talking about it in book club. Everybody in book club talked about how much it resonated with them. And I appreciate all your time today, Guinevere, and the chance to sit down and talk with you, a Hollywood hero.
Oh my God, this has been so great.
I was just going to say, I think you're an absolute rock star, and I really appreciate the time you've given me, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Take care, Guinevere. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.